It's about history. It's about preservation. It's about sense of place here on Eastern Long Island. With Esperanza Leon, I'm Irwin Levy, and this is Our Hamptons. Esperanza, I think we're going back to Wainscott.
Oh, I'm so excited. You know, I told you I can't not talk all about Wainscott.
You just don't like to commute either. I mean,
That's true.
Yeah,
Keep things close.
We're talking about Wainscott. You're talking from Wainscott. I mean, really. I mean, how could you beat it? But it's a fantastic community, and we sort of ended the last episode about Wainscott where we were talking about the Wainscott Heritage Project and the Little House, and I promise you, we're going to definitely get back to that. But we're talking about, Esperanza and I were talking about this privately. We can't help it. Once we start talking, we get so enthusiastic that we start zigging to the left and to the right, and there's just so much cool information
There
that we
is.
want to share.
Exactly.
We can't help it. So you have to excuse that about us, but we're very enthusiastic. But I don't think any conversation about Wainscott is complete without talking about, arguably, and we've talked about some great things, the post office and the old general store and the farms, but and the school, but if there really, truly is a heart of Wainscott, you could argue it is the Wainscott Chapel and the Wainscott Sewing Society.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's actually probably the most recognizable landmark of Wainscott. You know, everybody that goes by there sees that building. It's a white building, looks like a little church. And across the street from that is one of the most exquisite vistas. It's noted it has statewide significance. You know, it's recognized by the state of New York as having significance as a view shed. And that was part of the Osborne farm. But that, you know, together, you see people painting there all the time. You could just pivot in all directions, and it's just magnificent.
And the view you're talking about is Wainscott Pond.
Pond, yep, Wainscott Pond, the view to Wainscott Pond,
and the old Osborne homestead. I guess they're Osborne homesteads across the way, aren't or were the ones that are adjacent to that.
Pretty much all of that is that part of Wainscott is all Osborne. Yeah. Or was, yeah.
And to Esperanza's point, and even the fact that the state acknowledges this, it's also one of those places, very, very similar to when I talk about standing in front of the East Hampton Library, looking across at the cemetery and the Mulford Farm and everything. This is a similar vista in the sense that it's relatively unchanged from what it was 100 years ago. And hopefully 100 years from now will be the same. But it is a breathtaking vista. And the interesting thing about Georgica Pond is, now on the other side,
Wainscott Pond.
Excuse me, Wainscott Pond. Pardon me, Wainscott Pond.
The lesser known.
The lesser known, yeah, the poor man's pond, if you will. And believe me, this is no poor person's pond. This is a spectacular body, but you can't see it from the ocean. The dunes block it from. If you're walking along the beach, you don't really see the pond. But you have a clear,
which is unlike Georgica Pond. That's why people know Georgica Pond so well, because you can see it from the beach. But right. Wainscott is only visible from Main Street unless you climb the dune.
Right, exactly, and it really is beautiful. And the houses around it, the open space to the east of it, it is really a beautiful vista. But the chapel itself. Why don't we go down the road of the chapel and the Wainscott Sewing Society, because they play they're such a cool part of the community still after all these years.
Right. Well, you know, the Wainscott Sewing Society came out of the Wainscott Village Improvement Society, which was the organization that raised the funds to obtain this little chapel that we call the Wainscott Chapel. It's really a community house. I mean, and originally it It was, it was like a library. It was,
Right.
I think almost like a schoolhouse at times. It was a gathering place for the community, and had, it really has no religious affiliation at all, even though it's called the Wainscott Chapel. But it originated, it came from that building, came from, it was an original Bridgehampton schoolhouse on Ocean Avenue. If you know, I know we said we'd never talk about restaurants.
Right. Right.
But if you know Almond on the corner there of Main Street and Bridgehampton, this little schoolhouse was sort of behind where that building is. And around 1910, as I said, the Village Improvement Society raised the money, land was donated, and they, imagine this, they brought that building with a team of horses from Bridgehampton. I mean, I just, every time I think of buildings being moved, obviously there weren't all the, electrical utility
Right.
poles everywhere that were, that are such a nuisance nowadays for moving buildings. But I just try to picture that. And I have seen the pictures of this building in particular being moved, and it's incredible. It's
Yes.
incredible, or something similar anyway, not the chapel. But I mentioned Epstein and Barlow's history of East Hampton, and they say for many years its bell in the chapel called the village farmers and their families to evening hymn singing services, and visiting ministers regularly came to preach. So it was originally a chapel, it no longer is.
Right.
And that Village Improvement Society morphed into, or became, the Wainscott Sewing Society, which is the organization that has been the steward of the chapel for so many years now.
Right. And I remember reading they do something with the Wainscott School, like the kids go there.
That's right. They've always had, in the past, they would have hot lunches and things like that for kids that, couldn't go home necessarily for lunch, that kind of thing.
When you were talking to your husband about how important it was for you to live in Wainscott, was that part of the thing that entered your mind?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Kind of life where,
yeah, because I grew up, you'd go to the firehouse
Right.
suppers and things like that, right? Or the LVIS organized
Right.
at the fair, and they'd have the barbecue after, that kind of thing, and you were just surrounded by community. And the Sewing Society to this day still does a covered dish supper.
oh my gosh,
They have a strawberry festival that's a continuation of something the Osbornes used to do years ago. And they are
retaining the history and
exactly
and very Mayberry-esque, if you will.
Yeah. I mean,
Real,
yes. I mean, talk about nostalgic, but yeah, it's definitely maintaining those traditions.
Just small town America, like really. So that's
Yeah.
small town American life. And that's which obviously resonates with the Sewing Society to this day. I mean, it's probably a couple of generations of people active in this organization at this point, but that's fantastic stuff. So
it totally resonates with me.
yeah, I'm totally down with it myself. I love it. It's a great story. It's a great story. Now, and staying on Wainscott Main Street, on the same side of the street, if we continue on, so then we get to the Conklin House, which has another sense of history all its own. This is the Conklins, another one of these families, like Osborne's, like Hands, that have been in Wainscott for forever.
Yes. That's right. Yeah. And I apologize. I don't know the exact history of the house, but it did become a special historic landmark designated by the town of East Hampton, which I'm so grateful for, because it is, like the chapel, an icon for Wainscott. It's right at the top of Beach Lane. So whoever goes to Beach Lane, you can't avoid seeing this, who goes to the beach, which is the main beach in Wainscott, you can't avoid seeing this beautiful house.
Yeah. And again, we can't encourage you enough. These are, and I'm leading somewhere with this. There's a method to my madness right now. Okay. These are public roads. So I encourage, and this is a kind of place, Wainscott Main Street, for people just going back and forth to New York or Up Island or wherever, this is a destination. You're not going to pass it unless you make a concerted effort to go to it. I personally recommend a bike or a walk far more than a car, but okay. Either way, it really, you'll see everything we're talking about come true. It's the rural character, the lasting beauty, the just the gorgeous view sheds. And this is this is free for you to see on public streets. But as we go further east in Wainscott, the streets are no longer going to be public, because if we continue just a little bit further to the east down Wainscott Main Street, we're going to enter a very private enclave known as the Georgica Association. And don't try to get in there any time of the year, because the very friendly guard at the front of the entrance is just not going to let you in. I actually happened to speak to him. I'll give you a quick little anecdote about this. I was leading a walk here for the Trails Society in Wainscott last fall, and I took a bike ride over there, and I figured I'll sidle up to this guy and, use all of my wily charms and say, hey, I'm leading this, the East Hampton Trail. And before I got the word trails out, he goes, you're not coming in here. He said it with a smile. He couldn't have been nicer. You're not coming in. I said, okay, guy can only try. But anyway.
Can only try, exactly.
We tried. We have, we've been in there through the Wainscott Heritage Project, and Esperanza and her group was nice enough to invite me to participate. But we have gone in to the Georgica Association, and there are certainly some things of note. So I'm going to give it over to this Wainscott resident to tell us a little bit more about just the whole vibe in Georgica, which is really, it's hard to describe.
Yeah, well, I mean, think about it as, I always think about it, not so much what has become now this so exclusive enclave, gated community,
right?
Which, not to say that it wasn't always that. Picture that also, in order to create that settlement in the late 19th century, Wainscott people, the community, sacrificed their direct access, which wasn't so direct really, but they used to have like a causeway that went like an access over Georgica Pond to get to East Hampton. So that was a way to get to East Hampton. So Main Street didn't really end there. Main Street went through, and it was like Georgica Road, and then you could keep going, and you'd have like a little ferry that you would take to East Hampton. You didn't know this?
I can't believe this. I cannot believe you've been holding out on me on this. I got to wind this back for just 1 second, because I can't. Okay, so I'm driving my car. In other words, I'm just I'm waving to the nice guard who's somehow let me in. And so theoretically, traveling east on Wainscott Main Street, you went into the Georgica Association, and by vehicle, you would be able to drive to. It wasn't a bridge. You couldn't drive.
There was a bridge at one point, and the remnants of that still exist somewhere under the waters of Georgica Pond. It was a very, I think it was, if I'm not mistaken, my memory recalls that it was a very short-lived bridge, and there might have been like a little ferry as well at some point. But yes, essentially, Main Street extended all the way to Georgica Pond. And from there, a causeway carried travelers across the pond to East Hampton.
Wow.
Yes.
Wow. I did not know that.
Yeah. And actually, when that settlement also was created, and I remember, I think I'm mentioning this to your trail preservation group on one of the walks, was that, now we have Beach Lane, which is our access to the Wainscott's main beach. Mm-hmm. But that was actually a beach road that was created because of the settlement. So in other words, there used to be the access to the beach was through what is now the association. And then because that became the association, Beach Lane was created.
That was news to me, but that's an incredible story.
Pretty cool. Yeah.
That is.
So but when you think about this, I mean, these were all lands that then were purchased over time from the locals to create this summer colony, as you know, as you were referring to in our other conversation about the summer colonies in East Hampton and Southampton. And this was yet another summer colony of cottages that started popping up in the 1880s, 1890s, I think. But, you know, there was a little more, I would say, exchange between the communities, you know, of the settlement and Wainscott proper. And that's something that I think is not so much the case anymore.
Right.
I wonder about it. And it's unfortunate, you know, that's the thing that has changed because of this sort of exclusivity. But going back, though, those houses from the 1890s, there's a lot of them that are still in there, and they're amazing.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
what's also, I mean, you know, the iconic one that you can see from the beach, which is Kilcare,
Right.
Which, you know, any ad for real estate features that house as, you know, the sort of the prototypical summer cottage or house in the area. And that, you know, that's a very, very special house that almost requires a whole other conversation.
That could be an episode
in and of itself.
Yeah.
Right.
But it's an extraordinary oceanfront house, and it's built so close to the dunes. This house could not be built today, where it's currently sited. It is one of a kind, and it is evocative of a different time.
Yeah.
And there's only, I think, 8 or 9 oceanfront houses in Wainscott to begin with. There's not many, but this one is within the association. But we'll leave that for another day, because that could take on a life. It's extraordinary house. But
that, I was just going to say, that gives you an idea of the rest of the association and what it really looked like back in the day, you know, in the 19th century when it first was settled. And it was really like a place, like a really kind of low key place to hang out for the, you know, primarily white Anglo-Saxon Protestants that came there.
Right.
The Yaleys and the Harvard people.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much that's nothing to add. Pretty much.
But that said, anyone who grew up in Wainscott, even, you know, in the, I don't know, probably into the 80s or 90s, maybe now, but anybody that grew up really back in the day, you know, the book by Jeff Gehman, The Kingdom of the Kid.
Yes.
He talks about going into the association and hanging out with the kids in there and hiking around there and so forth. And I think, unfortunately, that's an aspect that has been lost.
Probably. And it still does have sort of the kind of things you were referring to. It has a little private club at the ocean, which isn't very fancy.
That pavilion, which was actually rebuilt
a
few years ago, but is not fancy.
No, it is not. You know, I would say the same thing about the tennis courts, where you have to wear white. Where you have to wear, like it's Wimbledon. And I want to be careful how I say this, because I'm being incredibly complimentary, and I don't want it to come out that it's not. It's sort of ramshackle chic.
Oh yeah, total shabby chic. It's
shabby chic, ramshackle chic, ramshackle in a good way. That's the
vibe.
Really, that's the vibe in there.
Yeah.
But there is also a windmill.
Yes, and you've nailed it with the tennis courts, because it is placed right next to the tennis courts, that windmill. It's a fantail windmill. Oh, it's such a beautiful one, which, as we've discovered, you know, with looking through the history books, originally stood near that general store on Hollow Road that was called Mill Hill.
Right. Oh my gosh.
And, you know, picturing the chapel being moved around. So that windmill was moved from Mill Hill on Hollow Road, across from the school. It was moved from there to Montauk.
Oh my God.
in the 1920s. And that was, I'm told, this as so the story goes, that Chansey, who we were talking about, who had the general store, the mill was no longer being used. And so one day, apparently the kids would hang on to the blades of the mill. And one kid ended up spinning up to the top and falling off and, breaking bones. And he said, forget it. It's a liability, this kind of thing. I mean, this was pre, litigation all the time days, but still he said, I don't want this headache. And so he sold it to Lathrop Brown, who was like a U.S. politician, a U.S. representative in government. And Lathrop Brown took it to Montauk, and it was on the bluffs there for over 20 years until with World War II, it became a liability yet again, apparently. And so Lathrop Brown had it moved to the Georgica Association.
And it's been there ever since.
And it's actually a National Historic Landmark. I mean, that is on the National Register.
Now, of course, the unfortunate thing is there is not much public access to this for obvious reasons, because it is within the association. However, it's one of, believe it or not, there's still 11, I think I read 11 windmills still on the South Fork, the eastern end of Long Island. So this is totally a part of Eastern Long Island folklore, legend. Windmills, East Hampton Village, you in the space of under a mile, you'll see 3 windmills.
Exactly.
It's just really it's evocative of certain sense of place here, and but this one's really special. Just where it's sited, the Georgica Association, in and of itself, is just a very special enclave. But it's now gated communities are a dime a dozen. You go up island, or you go in Westchester, or any suburb anywhere in the United States. That's a selling point. Gated communities. This place was gated before gated was gated. Before gated was chic. This was the original gated, and it's a vibe all unto itself.
Yeah. What is great is you can see it. You can kind of catch a glimpse of this windmill from Beach Lane, that road we were talking about, that was created when the association was created. And you can kind of glimpse it through the cornfields of the Babinski farm in the off season. Let's put it that way, because otherwise it's
right.
It's
one of these
too grown in.
When the deciduous trees lose their leaves, and if you crick your neck in a certain way. You can't catch it. You can't catch it. But it's it's I guess if you want to get up close and personal with windmills, go to BB on Ocean Road in Bridgehampton, or go check the 3 out in East Hampton Village. This one's going to be a little more of a challenge for you.
Yes.
But it's worth it nonetheless. Or score an invite to somebody in the association, and maybe you can get closer to it. But very, very cool place. I think, again, we're not going to end up getting to back into the Wainscott Heritage Project. It's
part 3 conversation.
Where as you see at our Hamptons, this is very free form. So we don't sit here with a very rigid outline, which sort of gets we sort of get a little off. We're sort of going off script without a script. There is no script, but we're going off script from a non-script.
We threw those notes out before we even started. But exactly. I mean, I think we could just say with Wainscott Heritage Project, we're so aligned with what the Sewing Society has done, which is maintain those traditions. Right. And that, I think that would encapsulate, we could certainly have a whole other conversation about Wainscott Heritage Project and how it came about. But we mentioned the little house. That 200 square foot structure represents to us in Wainscott everything that is potentially could be lost. To big houses.
Right.
And so, let's think about doing another conversation on just that.
We have to, but in the meantime, Wainscott Heritage Project does have a fantastic Instagram page. I I tell everybody about it because I call it a history lesson in an Instagram post, because that's really what it is. It's a little history lesson with amazing photography, amazing pictures and imagery, and really juicy details of Wainscott history. So we're going to post it on the link that you'll be able to get it. And I'll mention that again in the closing, but go to Wainscott Heritage Project on Instagram. And yes, we'll find a way to squeeze this into future conversations and get a little bit more into it. But
hopefully this whets the appetite, because it's certainly, like I said, we could just keep on going.
we could keep on going. And if anybody wants to lobby us to continue on Wainscott Heritage Project, we'll certainly listen. But I have a pretty strong suspicion it'll come up. But there's just so much history, and we can't seem to turn it off here.
I know, and especially for these small little hamlets, there is so much history.
There is just so much, and I hope. I know I sound sometimes over enthusiastic, but this isn't it. I just really feel this way. I can't help it.
I'm with you.
Yeah, the subject matter just excites me. I can't describe it anymore. I just love to talk about it. I'm fascinated by it, but that's really how this whole Our Hamptons came to be, because we both seem to be simpatico to these issues, and there's
Irwin, you know what I think, to me, and we were kind of touching on this earlier, or we have done in past conversations, is that I feel as if when I'm walking through any, whether it's Wainscott Main Street or East Hampton's historic district, where Mulford Farm is, or the cemeteries, or I feel like I'm living in history. That's the thing that I think that's what you and I share, is that passion for walking in the same places where people historically walked, and kind of getting a sense of how life was. And that's what excites us. I don't know. And I think that's how, historical societies operate this way. You've got to learn from the past to create the present, and, and shape the future, and so forth. Well, I'm all about that. And I think that's what these conversations are about as well.
I can't really add much to that, except to say I do feel the same way. And especially when we think of the history. And again, one of the other things that we're passionate about in Our Hamptons is preservation. And we've spoken about this in prior conversations. Some of the things that we love are disappearing. Some of the things that we love are under pressure and have the potential to disappear. So when you see things like the Georgica Association windmill, like Mulford Farm, and vistas of looking from the Wainscott Chapel across to Wainscott Pond, that are going to be there for when your children are adults and my grandchildren are adults, and they're still going to be there. That's my motivation here in a lot of ways.
And that's my hope.
Yes. Well, wow. This was, honestly, thank you. This was
fantastic. I think I almost wish we could just answer questions from people, you know what I mean? Yeah. Because I think that we could always benefit from even greater conversations.
That may be coming in Our Hamptons, but we are trying to crawl before we walk here, but that may be down the road, because there's so much out there, and so much to protect, so much to preserve, and yes, so much to celebrate. Esperanza, thank you.
Thank you. As always, an invitation to everyone to think about these things and share them with us. I think that's the thing that we are passionate about, and we hope you share that passion too.
I second that.
Thanks, Irwin.
Thank you, Esperanza. Thanks so much for joining us. New episodes of Our Hamptons are released every other Tuesday. Find them wherever you get your podcasts.